25 years ago this summer, The Office UK hit British TV screens. Okay, 25 years ago. Ricky Gervais and Stephen Merchant unleashed The Office on us all. It went on to spawn so many huge versions, and I'll come on to the US one in a minute, but there are editions that exist in Germany, Stromberg, in France, Sweden, Chile, and India. It became global. There was strip lighting. There were awkward social interactions. There was a horrible, horrible boss. It was ubiquitous. It was a mirror on all of our working lives. We all know an environment like The Office. We might not have worked there, but we certainly know someone who has, or we've been in one, or we've seen little bits of that in places we've been. The US version of The Office was the most streamed UK show in 2024. Now, it finished a long time ago. That shows the kind of pervasive power of The Office. But it wasn't the first. For 200 years, people have made fun of office work and office workers. So Charles Lamb, who many of you won't have heard of, in the 1820s was already writing poems about the dry drudgery of the desk. He would also write in one of his essays about how he sat so long at his desk, it literally got into his soul. He became one with his desk. How many of us have felt that feeling before? And he was at the beginning of something. So imagine, if you will, a world before offices. Bizarre as that sounds, but there was one. 200 years ago, there wasn't an office-scape like we know it now. But in the 19th century, the sort of early to mid-19th century, the beginnings of paperwork were there. So you suddenly get, the state gets bigger, you've got banking that develops, you've got things like empire, these all need administration. For the first time, you have an army of what are basically paper pushers. And they exist in horrible conditions. So if you own quite a successful manufacturing business, you might stick a couple of clerks in the cellar to do some of the work that you need around paperwork. They would literally sit hunched over desks on high stools, copying documents. They were human photocopiers. Their days were filled with literally writing out copy of things, putting numbers from one column into another. By the end of the 19th century, there were tens of thousands of them. They come every day into cities like London, these men normally in frock coats and black suits, and they're walking around and they're human photocopiers. They're going into these jobs. They have these poor conditions. The threat of tuberculosis, one historian puts it, is higher amongst office workers than people working in factories. That's how poor the conditions they were housed were in. And I can think of an example that I'm sure all of you will have heard of. Charles Dickens's A Christmas Carol, Muppets or otherwise. The basic premise is about Bob Cratchit, a poor office worker who works in an office so horrible that it's cold and dark and he's not even allowed a day off for Christmas. His boss, Ebenezer Scrooge, is the kind of early David Brent figure, okay? He's mean. So there's a narrative that's existed for 200 years about rubbish offices, depressing, tedious work, and the people who do it are considered boring. This is across all of popular culture. I can find you examples, thousands of examples, and I've spent the last 15 years, it's literally ruined everything I now read or watch, because I can guarantee I'll find something that makes a reference to how awful office work is. There are examples like Dad's Army, the 1960s comedy about the Home Guard. That's got nothing to do with offices. It's all about World War II, except that three of the characters, the most famous characters you could argue, all work in an office. They work in a bank. You've got the manager, Captain Mannering, who's pompous and ridiculous, and you've got the office boy, Private Pike, who's the butt of every joke. He's mollycoddled. His mum doesn't let him go out after dark. You've got things like Reginald Perrin, which none of you will be old enough to remember, but which was all about somebody who hated life in the corporate world so much that he would rather fake his own death than carry on going back into the office. Every single day in that show, his wife says to him, "Have a good day," and he goes, "I won't," because he knows he's going to have a rubbish day with his boss, who's absolutely ridiculous, and the people he works with. You've got it in things like Blackadder. who, with Captain Darling, is called a desk-sucking jotter-blotter. This is a man who gets excited about unloading 2 lorry loads of paper clips one Friday night. He's laughed at because he is a bureaucrat. He loves his office job so much, he is a soulless automaton. And also, I can show you examples that just are directly aimed at children. So why would there be lots of examples of office work being awful in things that are designed for children? Well, Peter Pan, Mr. Darling, is an office worker, the children's father. The kids go off to Neverland. They have a wonderful time, but he's stuck going into the office every day. And he can't quite afford a real nanny. That's why they have a dog. So he's laughed at because he's also quite poor. He's just an office worker. He doesn't make a lot of money. Mary Poppins, another children's favourite, with a character called Mr. Banks, the children's father, who's so boring, his job where he works is in his name. He works in a bank and he's called Mr. Bank. In Paddington, the recent films, Mr. Brown, example, you can see the names are also quite tedious and boring. They catch on. Mr. Brown is a risk analyst. He spends his whole professional life trying to avoid risk. That's not somebody who's particularly creative or exciting. That's somebody who by nature, therefore, is probably boring. So you can see in these examples that are directed at children why when Dawn in The Office, in the UK version, talks about her career, she says, oh, when I was a little girl, I always wanted to be a receptionist. And she's joking. She's not being serious. Nobody has that as their dream. Sometimes, though, these office workers in popular culture, they fight back. They try to overcome their office-ness and their kind of inability to be creative. In Ian Forster's famous Howard's End from 1910, there's a character called Leonard Bast who's stuck working in offices. He doesn't enjoy his life. He tries to get out of it. He tries to become more cultured. He goes to the opera. He gets in with a couple of sisters who are quite middle class, and he thinks that could change his life. He dies, spoiler alert. A bookcase falls on him and crushes him. The moral of that story is don't try and do that. Don't escape. Culture is not the way out. If you're the office working Leonard Bast, it's only dangerous for you. You can see it in other examples. There's a show called Colin's Sandwich that very few people have heard of from the 1980s that had Mel Smith in it. It was all about a man called Colin who worked for British Railway, and his job was to photocopy the complaints letters that were received by the railway company. So his 9 till 5 was stood at a photocopier copying complaints that people had about the railway service. And he tried to escape. He tried to become a writer. He spends all his time trying to get out by creative pursuits. If he can become a novelist, he won't have to work in the office anymore. He wasn't the first. There's writers like Arnold Bennett who wrote novels about the same thing. The difference is Arnold Bennett managed it because he became a writer, but none of his characters do. They all fail. They all end up back in the office like Colin. And it's true also of Tim in The Office. If anyone remembers the episode during training when Tim gets up and he says, no, I can't do it anymore. I'm quitting. I don't care about paper. I don't want to work here anymore. He hands his notice in. He walks out and he's going to go to university. He's going to change his life path. And then David Brent offers him a tiny pay rise and he goes back. He doesn't escape. And in the script book, which I've got a copy of, there's a beautiful stage direction that just says, with Tim back in the office. No one can escape. Even David Brent, when he doesn't work there anymore, hangs around like a bad smell. No one escapes the office. There are thousands of these depictions. If anyone saw the UK entry to Eurovision this weekend, the song was all about how the office cubicle had trapped the singer again. It's all about the 9 to 5. It's about the drudgery. It's about the office. It's a shorthand for things that are bad, things that haven't gone well. There was a Royal Navy advert a couple of years ago, the whole premise of which compared somebody being shown around a new office job, really boring, really awful people, really tedious environment, and then what their life would be like if they were in the Navy. And it was all meals out and team sports and adventures. That's the way the advertising campaign worked. And I haven't watched it because it scares me and I can't watch horror films, but Send Help, the very recent film, was advertised on television I was watching. And there's a lovely scene where something catastrophic has happened. They're on an island. Someone's holding a spear and screaming, "We're not in the office anymore." That's because they're outside, something completely catastrophic has happened, they're in a different environment. It's a shorthand, isn't it, the office? Oh, where do you work? Is mentioned in Eleanor Oliphant is Completely Fine, the novel by Gail Honeyman. And people, she says, people hear me say, I work in an office, they don't even ask anything else. They kind of know what that means. And they know what that means not only about where she works and what kind of work she does, but also about who she is as a person. So it's everywhere. Start to think about it, things you encounter, where the office sits, how you hear about the office will always be in a kind of negative context. It's the butt of a joke. It's the person who, we're laughing at in the comedy. So is it as simple as, okay, popular culture is a mirror on our society. We all think this, and that's why it's in all these TV shows. It's why it's in films. It's why it's in music. Dolly Parton, 9 till 5. It's why it's everywhere. Or does this constant bombardment of negative images about the office actually start to shape our collective cultural understanding? So that young Dawn who didn't want to be a receptionist, there are other examples. Is that how it's shaping how we view something? And is it any wonder that after COVID-19, when we were meant to come back to the office, why we were all a bit reluctant? Because we're thinking about these negative things all the time. So how can we understand the absolutely pervasive power of pop culture and how these attitudes and stereotypes are completely shaping how we view a massive industry? The biggest sector of workers are white-collar workers. How can we ever change the future of office work if we are stuck in a rhythm of repeating this pattern of negative ideas? And how can we think about an alternative, a future that has office work as something a bit more positive? Now, if we did reimagine office work and it became something more positive, I can't promise it will be as ripe for comedy, and I'm not sure we'd have the next best sitcom come out of it. But maybe, for a change, office workers might get a bit of respite. Office workers like you and me might not always be the butt of the joke. And maybe, sometime in the future, office work might be something young people aspire to. Thank you.